that we all came in spite of this rainy, wintry morning. And I'm so happy to see all of you here for the second colloquium. We have started this last year, the first JNU philosophy colloquium, and it's a JNU colloquium. It's, of course, we initiate that. It's not like initiative of any particular center. So it's just like philosophy that covers all the disciplines. So it is JNU colloquium. And this is the second colloquium, and with the subject Ontology of the Social. So this title has a small history. It was first suggested by Gopal Guru, and then I discussed with Sundar. And so it's basically their contribution. So Ontology of the Social. And from my part, like my area of research, theoretical philosophy, I would, I'm very happy to introduce this discourse now, because these are two terms which are so central to the disciplines. And as you all know, that theoretical philosophy, in the modern understanding, that is ontology and epistemology, and social as the most fundamental term in sociology. So then, now what we are going to do, that we are asking the same question: what is social? The ontology of the social. And there's a great significance that these questions are asked again and again in the history. And as you know, with philosophy asks the same question again and again since maybe 3,000 years. But then the nature of question is different, it changes, and also the answers. And in that sense, the philosophy, though we think that it's ahistoric, it is not, it is subject to history. So, and of course it is well known, there are epistemological terms in philosophy. And think about the pre-Socratic philosophy, and the major question was, what's the basic substance? So they didn't ask about how do we know, and the legitimacy or the truthfulness, about the truth of your knowledge, and etc. About the human subject. It was not about human subject, it was about the word and the basic substance. Thaliath and Anaximander, Parmenides, Heraclit. And then there is a Socrates, and that question changed. And whether we know certain, how do we know? So that's the epistemological term, and then Plato synthesizing and pre-Socratic and Socrates into one system. And this happens again and again in the history, and the most important second epistemological term would be the Cartesian term. You know, how Descartes schooled the scholastics and somebody rejecting the scholastics and establishing a new philosophy by going back to the first principle. So the term is meditation, the philosophy of the first principle. And this epistemological term is well known in the philosophy history. And likewise, and I would say, there's an ontological term. A turn to the ontology, a turn to the word question. So, for example, a philosopher like Ernst Cassirer, a great Kantian and a neo-Kantian, a student of Hermann Koch and Paul Nato in Babu. And he later, from Kant, he developed the philosophy of symbolic forms. And it's actually a new interpretation of Kantian synthesis, that the understanding, synthesizing the objects given in the intuition. And for Cassirer, these are symbolic forms and anthropological, cultural anthropological forms, like science, language, art, everything. And especially the language. And if language is a symbolic form, added to the reality, added to the objective reality, or the objects, or the cultural objects, or natural objects, just like clothes, that you are clothing the Gegenstand, that is the object, I would say it's very important at least to wash these clothes, not once in 10 years, at least once in 200 years. You have to reinvent the term, redefine the term, going back to the fundamentals. And then what is ontology? I mean, in the definition, it is the science of being, the science of existence, but easily said, and it's the most difficult thing in philosophy. And just like Heidegger said, there's a Seinsvergessenheit, and the forgetting that being. And this is applicable not just to science and technology, but to philosophy also, philosophy as a strict science. And relating to the first colloquium, it was a strategy to start with philosophy, science, and language. And language is so important. Language is so important. And likewise, there is a use of language because everything is in language. And there is an abuse of language in all these sciences, not just in philosophy, in other disciplines of humanities. So interestingly, for example, if you study in the West, for example, you study in the continent, school in maybe Germany or France, and move to England, it will be a very different experience for you. And the way they use ontology and epistemology. From my experience, you are not supposed to use these terms in the continent without adequately reflecting on it. But when you move to the Anglo-American space, you will find all forms of clubbing together, like ontological ecstasy or epistemological rigor or whatever. Which is possible. Then again, we have to use these terms to attribute other terms in social science and also in natural science. So all these are a necessity. Okay, and then now I hope that with this we are initiating a new discourse, and this will be followed up later, and we are actually planning further colloquiums based on these and similar topics, and this is an ongoing discourse. I'm extremely happy to have the speakers here, and first Gopal and Sundar. Anyway, we planned this colloquium, and I still remember that meeting Sundar Sarukkai 8 years back in IAC, NIAS, when he was working there, and we actually discussed the same thing. We discussed how this philosophy can be revived in the Indian context, and not again referring to this dichotomies like Indian and Western, etc., through the language, through redefining these terms. So I'm very happy that Sundar, you are back again in JNU, and Gopal, of course, and was very passionate about this subject and this discourse. And I had a long chat with Edward Rodrigues, and so then he was happy to be a part of this colloquium, and Gurpreet, Mahajan, who chaired this session, and all of you who are present in this colloquium. And for my part, I thank all of you. And this is the second colloquium. There will be further colloquiums next month, maybe 2, and also in April. All these colloquiums will be documented audio-visually, and you will find them in YouTube and Facebook later. And we are also planning to document it and publish it later, so in a book form. These are all dreams. I don't know whether it will be materialized. There are many problems. First of all, financial problems. And it was extremely difficult to find a place for this colloquium. And we are fortunate to have this now in the School of Social Sciences. And with this introduction, I will request Gurpreet to start chairing this session.
Thank you very much for asking me to be here on this second colloquium, and I'm looking forward, like everybody else, to the presentations that are going to follow. I know the last set of dialogues between Professor Gopal Guru and Professor Sundar Sarukkai yielded the book which I'm sure many of you have read, if not all of you have read, The Cracked Mirror, which has received I was going to say humongous response worldwide. And I'm looking forward to the initiation of another set of dialogues under the aegis of this particular colloquium, and of course also to hear Professor Rodrigues on the subject. So without much ado, I'm going to request Professor Sundar Sarukkai, who is here with us, I think, and we must thank him because he's come a long way. And he's, as you know, the director of the School of Humanities, Philosophy and Humanities at the Manipal University in Bangalore. So I request him to come and please make a presentation. And we thought we'd have a format where we'll have presentations for about, just some ideas thrown open for discussion for about 20 minutes, so that there's enough time for discussion. We'll initiate a little bit of discussion, so we'll have a little exchange between the speakers and of course a lot of questions from all of you. Sundar. Yes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gurpreet. It's a great pleasure to be here for many reasons, because it's part of a conversation which has been going on with many of you in the audience, which has started with my engagement with Gopal's work earlier, and I'm really glad to have an opportunity again to be in your midst. And I'm also glad to be part of this colloquium which Babu has started, because I think the focus behind the colloquium has been to bring together the different disciplines through the medium of philosophy, and that is something which we've always been working for all these years, and I'm so very glad to see it happen periodically at the JNU campus. As you know, there's been this conversation which we have had, which Gurpreet mentioned, which culminated in that book. Is an incomplete conversation, and there are many aspects of that text, there are many aspects of the themes in that debate which need to be worked out. And as part of our growing engagement with the responses to the book, Gopal and me have been thinking about this question, and it was actually phrased as the question of ontology of caste, which we did at TIS a few weeks back. Because there were certain specific set of questions we were addressing while we took on this theme, and I want to explain that as a background. It is to give you an idea of why I'm going to present what I'm going to present, and it gives you a reason for doing this, and also why I think in our own discussions both at TIS and here, and with a much larger group of students at TIS and elsewhere, on why we think this shift towards ontology is very important. And like always, what I'm going to present is largely meant as a point of entry for those who may not have done ontology, or you may have engaged with ontology in very different ways. In other words, we are trying to understand this question of ontology of caste not as a disciplinary perspective, which we call as sociology or philosophy or political science, but as a set of common idea which all of us engage with, which is present in us in various different ways. So I'm going to actually use this occasion primarily in response to a lot of invisible people who have asked these questions. So it's actually addressed to all of, some of you are here in this room, many others who ask these questions about the question of ontology. So at some level it's going to be an introductory emphasis on certain themes in ontology, but through it I want to come to the question of what is this social? Now, when we did this TIS one, we were looking at this ontology of caste. While that is, some part of it is very much part of this question here, we have enlarged this question for this audience and work which follows on the ontology of the social, and for various reasons which I'll explain below. Yesterday, I was actually in this conference in CSDS, and yesterday Shomu, whom I'm sure many of you know, who's teachers or going to start teaching at Arts and Aesthetics, made this comment in a conversation in the question and answer session, where he pointed out that Ambedkar in 1916, he said, refers to this problem of the mystery of caste. And when Ambedkar was talking about this, he said he's not talking about the removal of caste, but he said a removal of the mystery of caste. And there was a point which Shomu was making about this idea of caste as a mystery. Now, if you really look at this question of caste as a mystery and ask the question, what is so mysterious about it? And this, when you look at all the debates on caste, for example, have often been rephrased as an argument about whether caste exists or not. Does it have a social reality or not? Does it exist, quote, in the mind or in the society, and so on. And this is a question which many of us respond to. Our answers to this question about caste is dependent upon the nature of what caste is. So that's the point I want to begin with. First of all, therefore, there is a side story to all this discussion, which is the question about social action versus social theory. And I want to be sensitive to that debate. I want to take that seriously rather than saying social theory is doing something and social action is doing something else, which I do not believe it to be the case. Now, this is not a claim for the legitimacy of social theory. I'm just saying this in the larger background of what it means to act in a socially responsible manner. What does social action itself mean? So, instead of going into that particular topic, I'm stepping one step behind and giving us the theoretical foundation in order to address the question, what does social action mean? So, when we started this question about caste, it was things like, you see everywhere eradication of caste, eradication of untouchability and so on. So at a level of social level, you know that there is an eradication of caste, is one of the principles which we might all want to work towards. But the question is, what is it that you are eradicating? The problem is not in accepting eradication of caste, but the problem many times is in understanding what is it that caste is that you want to eradicate. In other words, the step, as Babu said, from epistemology to ontology is just this very simple step of knowing the object before dealing with the object. So I'm going to look at that sense in a very simple sense of ontology as the set of things which we engage with, which we believe exists, and ask the question, if you want to engage with the thing which is present, unless you know the nature of the thing, you don't know what to do with it. And we know that the nature of things allow different kinds of actions on them. So the very first question, therefore, is to ask, why ask this ontological question? Particularly, if you leave it aside as a philosophical, esoteric preoccupation of this odd community called philosophers, why is it that people in other disciplines, including people who are very concerned about social change, people who are very concerned about nature of human action, why should they even ask this question about ontology? And the answer, as I said to that, is for change to happen, you need to know the objects of change, which you need to understand. So I'm giving you a very simplified answer. I'm sure we'll debate it and pull out the complexities. The second point, what I want to do here is, accepting that we will ask the ontological question, take it seriously, then the question is, how do you ask this question? What does it mean to ask the ontological question? Because many writers use these words very easily, ontology of this, ontology of that. So what does it mean to ask that question? What does it mean to ask a question when you come from the preoccupations of social change, not social theory or philosophy? Why does it matter, and how can I make it happen? So I'm going to use these as the framework in order to say what I'm going to say. Again, although we began with caste, we are extending it to the social, as I said, for many reasons. And part of the question about caste we were also responding to is when we're talking about the reproduction of caste and why does it keep getting reproduced. So when you talk of reproduction of injustices and reproduction of caste, then there is a question about reproduction which is very simple. What kind of things get reproduced? What is being reproduced? What is the nature of reproduction? And this, Gopal may talk about it, but I think that's one of the new contributions he's been talking to me about, and we're looking forward to seeing this whole conceptualization of reproduction there. Okay, so I'm sure all of you have an idea of ontology, but for completeness sake, so that all of us think through this together, I'm going to just list out the basic issues in it, so that we can work at it together in order to formulate the ontology of the social. Now, in a very fundamental sense, the problem about ontology as social begins with the very idea of ontology itself. And if I look at ontology, I'm using that as a very loose word here, but if I ask this, I can begin with a question of asking what are the things in this room. It's an extension of what is there present in the world. So if I ask what are the things there in this room, and if somebody gives us a list, of course they'll give us a list of all of you, if you have a set of names, and then they'll also say things like students, they'll say teachers, maybe tables and chairs, and mics and whatever. There are some of you who might also say there are things like individuals here, persons here, people here, women here, men here. And these are very common ways of talking about things which are present. We also, some of you might say there are gods here, some of you might say there are ghosts here. And some of you might even agree that there are some minds here, few of them at least. And then we ask the question, if you have this kind of, and of course the two very difficult terms of things which we think exist here would be space and time. I mean, these are lists. even if you remove the more contentious ones, these are ways in which we commonly talk about things which are there in the world. And now if somebody asks you this question, what is it that characterizes these chairs, tables, the existence of chairs, tables, along with people, individuals, ideas, space, time? What is common to all of their existence? Why do all of them exist in some sense? Why do you think they are there in this room? Now, just to motivate this for you to think about in the context of the social, when we talk about the social, we are talking about it in very similar ways. When you ask, what is there in society? You will say caste is there in society, poverty is there in society, injustice is there in society, etc. In other words, many times, most of the times we talk about these terms, we are talking about things being in society, like things being there in this room, except our basic point of contention is what is the nature of these things. And of course, even at the very fact that the way the chair is and the table is are very different compared to what people are and concepts are and so on, we still talk about them as if they all have some notion of existence. So while you might have a different discipline like metaphysics which might want to tell us these characteristics of this existence, we are still working at a very fundamental level. When I say something is there, I want to understand what is there, what is the nature of the thing that is there, and how is it there. So I want to understand how is the social there. That's all. And anything you talk about society and social, how is it there? What is the form in which it is there? And I'm giving this example of the room because already within this room there are things which are there, but which have completely different forms. Like it could be with material objects like us, but the idea of persons, individuals, etc. are not. You can't point to a form called persons or individual. You can't point to something called space. And those of you who are philosophy students know the wonderfully rich philosophical discussions on space and time. One of the most profoundly difficult questions to deal with. What is the nature of the existence of space and time? And these, remember, are also social categories. And that's very extremely important for us to understand it. These are not some esoteric philosophical categories. They are natural categories. If you look at it as part of natural world, they also become social categories. Particularly the question of space and time. For those of you who are interested, you should look at more of wonderful ways in which one can look at this question of space. Of course, you know this Henry Lefebvre's work and Gopal's piece on, I think one of the best pieces which I've read, which I'm sure many of you have read, which is also reproduced in the Cracked Mirror, on space and justice. It's a way of, and that is the question of understanding space in the social sense. So you're trying to do an ontology of space in the social sense, in his piece. Or when scientists look at space, they're looking at ontology of space in the natural world kind of thing. So there's obviously something very different between space, time and objects. In the same way, there could be social objects can be very different in kind, in their very nature, how they differ from each other. So if you look at, let's say at least we look at the philosophical understanding of this, and that's I think a very crucial way of understanding this, and I think it's a very useful way of entry into this. So philosophically, it does not make sense for me to list out all the things that are there in the world. I could list out objects, things, tables, etc., pen and so on, but rather ask a simple question, what are the common properties, to use it loosely, what are the common properties of all things that exist? And that's really the task of metaphysical categories, the categories which underlie any notion of existence. So in other words, the way in which a chair is real should be there must be something in common between that and the way in which space is real. Although space and time seem so different. Mind is a mental entity. This famous Descartesian break between body and mind. And if mind is and bodies are all extended and mind is non-extended, if you look at that formulation, for example, something different between the nature of mind and nature of body. But if mind is real and body is real, then I have to know what is common between the two of them that makes both of them real. And that is the fundamental metaphysical question. That is, what are the categories of reality that characterize all real things? And, as I said, while some people look at metaphysics as something going far away from the world, it's asking a very world question. That is, the commonness of all things which are there. there has to be something common for all things which are there, right? And of course, if you want to make it sound very philosophical and complicated, and normally I try and avoid that, but there is this very nice example which I like, just as a aside. When we look at, for example, commonality of things, when I say, let's say apple is red and table is red and the ball is red, the idea of red is common to all these objects. And you look at this, something called red is common to all of them. That's how we make sense of the word apple is red, bottle, table is red, and so on. Now, in all the terms of existence, mind is red and bottle is red, etc., whatever it is you want to say, the common thing which characterizes that existence is this very simple word is. So in a sense, what we are asking is, as Heidegger would ask, what is this isness that characterizes existence? That is a common thing which seems to capture that thing being there. So that idea is just to indicate to you that the question we ask about something being there, being real or whatever, is to characterize a common element. So although the mind and space and time and objects are very different to us in our perceptual terms, in metaphysical terms there are certain common elements which hold them together, which tell us in some sense in what sense they are real. And therefore, I won't go into these larger categories and so on, but just to point out that through this history of ontology and or philosophy, we work with this very simple preoccupation, which Russell in his first early work itself, on his popular book on philosophy itself, begins with, and which all philosophical traditions begin with, the distinction between appearance and reality. The world appears to us in some way, but perhaps there is a larger real structure. The real structure of the world is different. And the similar questions comes to society, the idea of the social. Any kind of congregation, it appears in a particular way, but perhaps the reality of it, whatever you mean, behind it is different. And so the task of the sciences and philosophy as a science in a very odd sense, in the last colloquium we had a much longer discussion on this idea of science and philosophy and scientific philosophy. But if you keep all that aside, the task of, I think, most of these intellectual disciplines, whether they are natural science, social science, or philosophy in that sense, is to discover these larger structures of reality which hide behind appearance. So if you look at that as a common element between many of our ways of understanding nature or society, you'll already see the way to formulate the question. Because the first point is the appearance, the way the world appears to us, the way the society appears to us. When we encounter what you call as Indian society or Delhi society, whatever it is, it appears to you in a particular way. And the way things appear to you are influenced from a variety of things, including your bodily structure, cognitive faculties, your languages, the language you have, the concepts you possess, and so on. And that's the world of appearance. Appearance is mediated by these terms. Now, therefore, immediately the problem is, in order to understand this idea of the real which is present, what is really present either in nature or society, you need to be able to understand this link between body, concepts, language, etc. And particularly the question of language and reality also becomes extremely important. Okay, so I want to skip from this very quickly to ask these basic questions. What is the ontology of the social? How do we think about the social? I want to start with a completely different direction to this. Rather than talking about the social or society, I want to talk about a very common perceptual idea, which the question of the social actually can begin with a question of a collective, with a question of an aggregate. So the fact that so many people are in this room, that the set of all of you together constitute something. Now, it's very interesting that you would actually find, for those of you who are interested in encountering more deeper into the philosophy of social science, to actually make a slight detour through philosophy of natural sciences, not in the usual standard understanding of the relationship between social science and natural science, but actually in this idea of sets. Because if you look at the first example, and this has been a very rich field of work, both in philosophy of science and philosophy of mathematics, on understanding the ontology of a set. Because what is a set? A set is a collection of any random things. I could take 3 people and call it as a set. I could take one person from here and put it to the moon and call that a set. A set is in principle, and what we call as a mathematical set or a regular set in a common conception of it, is any regular random set of things. But the